So I saw yesterday that this Lit project, which is a relaunch and rebranding of the Lit element project, introduced this new feature they call reactive controllers. And I was pretty interested because it's very similar to the way I've been building controllers in Imba, where I attach a class to my tag that has all the logic of that tag so that I can make the tag code just be the view and have the logic be totally separate. So they have like basically the same concept, but there's some really nice touches with how they set it up. And so I was inspired by that, and I built a improved kind of controller system for my projects. So let me show you how I set it up now. I'll first just show you the kind of end result. So in this tag called app, there's two controllers being used, mouse controller and count controller. And you can see those are just stored here. And it makes it really easy to just say mouse position.x and mouse position.y, because this controller manages how to figure out the mouse position, and you can see the result of that here. The other one is count controller, which is kind of like that hello world of this kind of stuff, I think, where I've got a button. The click handler is count.decrement. So again, that's the controller defines decrement and increment, and then count.value. So the value and the increment and the decrement are all defined in the controller. So it's really easy to hook it up to your view, and the logic is totally separated from your view, which I think is great. So what's different about how I'm setting these up now? So what I did based on that Lit project, it kind of inspired me to do this, where when you instantiate the controller, you pass in a reference to self, so that the controller has a reference to this tag. And you'll also notice that this tag is now a subclass of controller host. The controllers themselves, if we look at one, this is the mouse controller. It's just a class. I wrote it in TypeScript, but you could write it in Imba just as well. This extends a class called controller. So the tag, your Imba tag, extends controller host, and your controller extends controller. So let's look at what those are exactly. So here's the controller base class, and you can see it has a host property. And in the constructor, so that's when you instantiate the controller, you give it a reference to the tag that's instantiating it, which is the host of that controller, and that gets assigned to this property of the controller class, and then this calls add controller on that host, so that's on the tag. So where does that come from? Like I mentioned, your tag is now a subclass of controller host, so controller host defines this add controller, which we'll look at in a second. These are kind of just stubbed out mount and unmount. And then this controller defines render as well, which just calls this .host.render. So really nice, because in your controller, you can just call render and it renders your tag. So it makes it really makes them feel closer together. Now controller host, this is the base class for your tags that want to use a controller. It extends Imba element, which just means it's like extending a Imba tag. And it has a property that is an array of controllers. And add controller here, you can see when you instantiate a controller, it adds itself to this to the host using add controller. And that just pushes it onto this list of controllers. And that allows you to do things. There's also a corresponding remove controller. That allows you to do things like have a mount method here, which matches the Imba lifecycle method called mount. And it will just loop through all the controllers that are attached to this Imba element and call mount on them. And same thing for unmount. And you can, of course, add the other Imba lifecycle methods. So that allows me to write a controller that makes use of mount and unmount, these lifecycle methods, and also to call render because of this. And it's just like a really clean way to set it all up. Let's take a look at this mouse controller. So mouse controller extends controller, which means that gives it the host property. So you pass in the host to the constructor, that passes it to super, which sets it on this class, and then you have render now too. So I can also call render wherever I want, and that will render the tag, which I needed in this case because I'm using a global event listener for mouse move, and so Imba doesn't know about that, and you need to call render explicitly. And so you can just easily just call render, and it renders the tag. And then I just do my other stuff here of setting the X and Y properties. And it's nice that I can hook into unmount here to remove the event listener. So all this logic of adding event listeners, figuring out the X and Y position, and rendering is all set up in the controller. So I could give you this controller to use in your Imba tag, and you could use this logic without needing to implement it. But it doesn't say anything about the view. So you can make your own view. You could use this in your own way, but all the logic is here. So it makes sharing and separating code really nice. We can look at the count controller. This one's very simple. Just stores a value and then exposes increment and decrement methods. But otherwise, it's basically the same thing. So I've been using this controller pattern in all my Imba projects. I built like really complex controllers that do all kinds of crazy stuff so that my views can stay really simple and so that I have some benefits of reuse. But these kind of subclass of controller host and controller make setting up these controllers, I think, way cleaner and nicer.